Thank you very much to the three of you for presenting these initiatives. They are great initiatives and they're certainly going in the right direction. However, digital is a global world. So how do you see all these initiatives working together? George, you want to start?
Sure, I'll start. Well, I think the truth is we have a lot of work to do as a group to become better aligned. I mean, I think we're very focused on studying the data and establishing sometimes quite detailed parameters. But I think to do this work effectively globally, we need to work together and try to focus on more general principles. That's probably a likely outcome. But we welcome it. I mean, we try to communicate with Alison and Richard and any, CESP, et cetera. So I do think you've identified a key thing we need to do, which is better harmonize our processes. So, but it's going to be a lot of work to line everyone up.
Yeah, I think overall we're always aiming to achieve a global and harmonized standard. With Europe, we need to recognize that we have a bunch of markets with a lot of differences in a variety of different areas. So what we're trying to do is to really create a framework whereby we can establish minimum best practice. Obviously, markets can build on that, but really try to get everybody to come up to a certain level of practice within each market. Now, at the same time, we hope that by bringing them together, we'll be able to effectively communicate better with the work that George is doing in terms of expressing a European voice on that, and really be able to, again, go to the next stage and all talk about future developments together. And obviously it's great that George and Richard have done a lot more technical work on this to begin with, and we're catching up, so we're able to absorb all of that best practice in what we're doing.
Good. Richard, do you want to add something?
Yeah, briefly, broadly, surprise, surprise, I agree. But I think one word George used nailed it for me, and that's the word principles. What we've tried to do with JICWebs is have a principle approach, principles around how businesses process what they do, and that is a higher level, if you like, than all of the detail that George does. And the reason for that is the scale of the work George does in the biggest market in the world with the biggest data and, frankly, the bigger level of investment allows that granularity in a way that some of the smaller markets for the smaller players is not necessarily practical. And I think the two are complementary. We've really listened hard to all of the work that George and the team have done, and we've tried to make sure that the principle-based approach takes all that into account. And I think if you look under the hood of it, there's a remarkable amount of alignment already at that level. But yes, we should clearly have more work to do.
Good, thanks. My second question is on discrepancies. I'm talking about discrepancies between viewability rates between vendors for the same campaign, and I know that's causing a lot of confusions for advertisers. So I know these discrepancies were a starting point of some of the work you did in the UK. It was a starting point for us in France too, and I know the MRC has done a lot of work on this topic and published a reference document on discrepancies. So my question is, as a result of your work, have you observed a reduction in discrepancies? Richard? Yeah?
Certainly in the UK, yes. And the reason I can say that is if you look at the detail of the reports from last November compared to the earlier reports, you'll see the work done by those commercial vendors has improved. The positive reporting has increased and therefore dealt with a lot of the key issues and that cause discrepancies. And that was what we were asked to do, to reduce them, like we did years ago with the ad serving standards, reduce them from 2 digits to 1 as a main aim, and I think we're going in that direction. But George, as ever, has more insight on the data, I think.
Yeah, well, I think the key thing, Valerie, is that we've seen notable reductions in discrepancies in a desktop environment. In fact, our data shows that the key source, the majority source of discrepancies is mobile, because all the measures are handling mobile differently, which is why we have urgency to put out, you know, the mobile standards. So when we calm things down as usual, we then create more noise because we're issuing a mobile viewability standard, so there's going to be discrepancy noise. Now, what we've tried to do is learn from what we did in desktop and incorporate those discrepancy abatement principles in mobile, but there are new things that can arise, like power management issues and stuff like that in mobile that can cause you know, situations of discrepancy. So there will be work to do. The other thing I'll add is, I don't know how many of the folks saw it, but for example, yesterday there was an announcement that we just accredited ComScore's VCE audience product, which I congratulate them for many years of hard work there. But there's going to have to be a reconciliation of those products too. So the ComScore VCE product has to be reconciled with other GRP measurement products in the marketplace. So anytime we do standards, when this audience standard comes out, we need to do reconciliation project. It's business as usual, basically. So, and when things calm down, we shake it up again by issuing new standards.
Yeah. Not a lot to add there, just that obviously discrepancy, getting rid of the discrepancies is at the heart of making sure that there is efficiency, and there's no point in having a standard without getting rid of that, so that's really a key focus.
Okay, thanks.
Just add one tiny bit. One example of how we learnt from all the work George did in the early days, of the viewability stuff, was, do you measure the container that the ad is going to be placed into, or do you measure the ad? And both organisations started with, well, both of those seem a good place to start, depending on the tech that you're applying, but we've shifted towards you have to measure the ad, because just that one thing on its own was a cause of discrepancies, even in just desktop display.
Okay, thanks. We have a few minutes left, so any question? Yes?
Yeah, I have a question. For viewability, we know that MRC viewability, for example, for video is 2 seconds for 50% in view. GroupM come up with, by the way, I come from GroupM. GroupM come up with a GroupM viewability, which it's more selective, the standard is higher. So what is MRC's take on this matter? And should the market have two different standard for viewability, like GroupM is 50% of the duration, 100% of the pixel in view? I guess this is the question for George.
Yeah, I'm not sure I heard it. I'm sorry.
Is it the definition of viewability you're asking about?
Yeah, the definition. The MRC standard for video viewability is like you have to watch like at least 50% of the pixel for 2 seconds, right? And GroupM, on the other hand...
GroupM, yeah, okay. I got the question. Yeah, I got the question. Thank you for that. So GroupM is an advertising agency, as everybody knows, and they are trying to appeal to their marketer clients about the way they're protecting them. So they don't necessarily need or want to use the minimum standard that MRC established. So if you remember that chart that I first put up that had the arrows, where the very first thing we wanted to do was take the waste out of the ecosystem, the waste of non-viewable impressions. So we set a standard, a minimum standard for viewability to take the non-viewable ads out. But that's not to protect a marketer's brand message. It's to eliminate waste. The follow-on steps of the project, which will be duration weighted and even getting to the value, that's where you're going to see us incorporate things like how to measure the GRP and how to measure ad effectiveness and things like that. What's important to remember about the standard we set is it's a minimum, it's a threshold when an ad becomes viewable. Before that, let's say somebody wanted to measure an ad that was a millisecond and 1 pixel. You can do it. You can call it what you want. I wouldn't want you to call it a viewable impression, but you got to understand that that has less value. And based on our research, hardly anybody, almost nobody, interacts with that ad ever at that stage. So it's a non-viewable impression. If you're going to measure less than the MRC standard, you can call it something different. If you want to measure more, call it a viewable impression still. But you can measure something more intense than the MRC standard if you want. It's the minimum, though, that we want to have reported all the time.
Okay, thank you very much, George. Thanks, everybody, and thanks to our speakers.